Podcasting is more than just talking. It's listening. BSing with Bob Schmidt.
A guy whose superpower is being a writer, Mark DeWayne Combs, joining me on the BSing with Bob podcast. Wrote a couple of books, actually 3 of them. One called Push, one called Don't Forget Your Cape, and the final one is Hello. Is this on? Mark, thanks for joining me. Why 3 books all published in the same year?
Well, it really became a matter of availability. I had a good group of beta readers. I had someone who was in a good position as far as doing the formatting of the book and things of that nature for me. So it was really during that period of time made it opportune for me to just continue writing and get all 3 of them done and out in the same year. We released Push in April 15th, which a lot of people think of as Tax Day. I released it in honor of Leonardo da Vinci. That's actually his birthday. And then we followed that up a little bit later in the year. In July, we threw a book called Don't Forget Your Cape and put that out for people to have available. And then when we got to November, we had Hello, Is This On ready to go. And so we went ahead and published that one. In November, it's got a piece in it about the Gettysburg Address, so we published it on the anniversary date of the Gettysburg Address. And so that's how the 3 books all rolled out in the same year. It was a lot of work, but I think it was well worth it.
Ever thought about just rolling them all into one book and just have it be, the book of Mark?
Well, they do kind of follow the same trajectory as far as the way the text unfolds, but they kind of focus in 3 different areas. The first one, Push, I wrote really to go along with a lot of presentations that I do. I'm a motivational speaker, and I'm often speaking to small groups for a company, somewhere between 12 and 20 people. And a lot of times the topics they want me to cover are things along the lines of time management and goal setting. Those are kind of the hot topics. So Push kind of touched on both of those a little bit, primarily on why we don't make good use of our time and how we can do better with that, but also goal setting, which I think a lot of people make that really a lot more difficult than it actually is. And so I kind of wanted to address that with that book and have something to go with my presentation. And that was, met with a pretty good reception, so we just rolled it into the next 2 books. Another presentation that I do is really one more of encouragement for folks who feel like that, they put forth an awful lot of time and effort and energy, and are they really accomplishing anything that matters in the long run? And so we really wanted to address that with the second book, Don't Forget Your Cape. And so it centers around the impact that a person can have as an individual, and in many cases we don't even see what that impact is. And then the third book was just designed to be something encouraging, especially for those folks who feel like they're working in a vacuum. So Hello, Is This On? And we drew from a lot of illustrations in that book of very well-known incidents, but not so well-known components in those incidents that we brought to light that I think people will go, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't realize that. And it just goes to show that sometimes you feel like you're operating in a vacuum, and you're really not. You're doing what you were called to do, and it is having an impact even though you don't see it.
What is an example of one of the opportunities that you didn't think was making any ground that ended up making some ground?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think for me, when I hear motivational speakers, and I've heard a great number of them, usually they will have a type of connection with the audience, something along the lines of they overcame a great difficulty and they're wanting to encourage others that are struggling that they can overcome a great difficulty, or maybe they were born with some type of a disability of some type that people said, hey, you can't do this. And they didn't listen to the crowd, and they went forward and chased their goals and actually achieved those goals. Well, I don't really have either of those 2 things working in my life, Bob. I am fortunate that I was born with every aspect of my physical presence being 100% operational as you would expect. And so I can't say, well, I had this physical abnormality that I had to overcome. And in so doing, maybe I can encourage and inspire you. I don't have that. And I've been fortunate in my life that I haven't had any great tragedy where I've had a significant loss or pain or something that I can point to and say, hey, I recovered from this. Maybe that can be an encouragement to you. I'm a person who has gone with day in and day out with the task at hand, whether it be that of making the sale or taking care of the customer or connecting the client, or maybe for the housewife, just taking care of the day-to-day things around the house. And there hasn't been any great difficulty that I've needed to overcome other than the mundaneness of that task day after day after day. And how do you stay sharp? And how do you stay inspired? And how do you stay in a position where you feel like, yes, getting this load of laundry done, getting these things here around the house taken care of, putting a meal on the table because I spent time at the grocery store, that actually has a far-reaching impact with my family. Sometimes that gets underappreciated and overlooked. And I think that there's a large number of people who kind of fall into that realm where they are busy doing things that actually do have an impact, but they're not really considered to be all that impactful. And I really wanted to turn a focus on that and say, no, you matter. You make a big, huge impact on those around you. And you really don't want to lose sight of that.
So you mentioned that that you haven't had any physical problems, or that you didn't lose this or that or the other thing. But everybody's got obstacles, Mark. Every single person that we run into. What's an obstacle that you may have overcame in your career?
Well, for me, it was just a matter of managing my time, because I'm one of those people that, and I realize my circle's pretty small. There's probably not a lot of people listening to this, Bob, that would admit to being easily distracted, that the next shiny, sparkly thing on the horizon kind of distracts their attention and they turn away to that and lose track of what they were doing. I'm a person that really struggles with focus at times.
I'm guessing that honestly, Mark, I think that most people do. I mean, when I record my podcasts, I keep my blinds closed because otherwise I'm looking outside at the squirrel, or, hey, look at the shiny object, or, hey, somebody just walked by. I wonder what they're doing, and then so my mind goes elsewhere. I think that a lot of people have a hard time trying to focus in on, the task at hand and things that need to get done, like now.
So you think there's a lot of people that struggle with that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I kind of feel the same way. I say facetiously I'm probably the only one, but I kind of feel the same way, that I'm running in a much bigger circle than people would like to admit, that general focus on what we're trying to do is not as easy as it sounds. I mean, it is easy if we're sitting down to watch our favorite TV program, but if we're in the middle of a long work day, hey, the phone's ringing, I got emails bouncing through, I've got people knocking on my door, it's really easy to get distracted. And when I get distracted, am I going to be able to accomplish what I need to accomplish? And the answer to that is, it's a battle. It really is.
In your first book, the book Push, you had mentioned that you want to help people with goal setting and stuff, and I think that that'll probably tie in a little bit with what we were just talking about, the goal of getting the task done and trying to find focus on the things that you want to get done. How do you tell people, or how do you teach people, or when you're up there doing your presentations, how do you get people to get those goals down and then work toward getting their getting the goal completed?
Well, in essence, I believe that in most cases we make goal setting much too hard. It's something that we do on a daily basis, really by default. And I'll give a simple example that I feel like most people could relate to. If you or I got up in the morning and decided we wanted to have a bowl of cereal for breakfast, we wouldn't have to give that much thought. We've done it before. We've gone through the process. Pull the milk, pull the cereal that we want. If we wanted some fruit cut up in it, we could pull that. It's really not that difficult to do. And the reason it's not difficult is because we've done it so many times. But when we look at something new that we want to achieve, we look at that particular achievement as something that's going to take a lot of effort. And it really doesn't take effort as much as it takes commitment to the task to get from point A to point B, in the same way as making a bowl of cereal for breakfast. We know the ingredients that are involved. We know how to put them together. We do that on autopilot. Some of these other things we can do easy as well if we would just sit down and decide, okay, what moves me from point A, where I am, to point B, where I want to be, and break it down into a real simple process, something that can be done, something that we can identify, step 1, 2, 3, and so forth, and then just do the steps. It's not hard, but it's something that we make hard because we over-evaluate what we're trying to do in the entire process. So it becomes more of a challenge, it becomes frustrating, and we never achieve the goal, we give up on it.
So basically break it down into smaller chunks and work on that and then commit to get those done, and then pretty soon you've got tasks 1 through 5 done and it's finished?
Make it simple. It's just like picking up the cabinet from IKEA and sitting down in the living room. You've got parts all over the place, but page number 3 says put these parts together first. Before you get to page 7, you don't go through that book in random order. You go through that book one step at a time, and any goal that you want to achieve can be broken down that way. Maybe I should throw in the qualifying phrase, any reasonable goal, because sometimes we do get a little bit unreasonable with what we want to do. But any reasonable goal that you want to achieve can be accomplished in that manner if we just take a measured, step-by-step, methodical approach to it. We can get it done.
Well, a lot of times you have to be able to decipher the pictures in the IKEA book in order to get that in order to get that done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sometimes those pictures are a little bit crazy. So when it comes to putting together a book, and like I said, you wrote 3 in 1 year, which is quite a lot. I'm paging through and looking at different things, and explain a little bit about your ramblings on the wall.
Well, I tried to break every book up into sections, and on Saturday mornings I will normally sit down and just go through a writing exercise, pour my cup of coffee at 5 a.m., sit down at the keyboard, and whatever's kind of stuck in my mind during the week, I'll try to expand upon that just a little bit. And on one particular morning, something had triggered some thoughts about the Wall album from Pink Floyd. And so I wanted to write a little bit about the backstory of that, and also use it as a little bit of an inspiration to kind of get me off of dead center with some things that I had kind of packed in myself. I think it's easy when you get very involved in your own work, your own process, the things that you are hands-on dealing with. I think it's very easy to separate yourself from the outside world a little bit more than you should. And that had been a trap that I had fallen into. So that was kind of the nature of that particular Saturday morning ramble, in giving the backstory of the 2-album set that Pink Floyd put together, the backstory of the story itself, and then also some of the things that they deal with the character of the story, Pink, who a lot of people think is a mixture of some of the band members of the group, and the things that he went through and had to overcome. And to make the expansive short story a little bit more concise, he has isolated himself off from the rest of the world, and toward the end of the 2-album rock opera, so to speak, he has to tear the wall down and open himself back up to interacting with the world again. And I just thought it was a great metaphor for those of us who sometimes get so wrapped up in our own world, the things that are important to us, the things that we're busy with, that we lose track of some of the things that we should be a part of in the world. And, we have to really make a conscious effort to stay involved in those things, or it can end up being on the wrong side of the wall and perhaps lost forever.
Mark, what's a wall that you've tore down in your life?
Well, one of the things that I had really gotten away from, and this is something that was a challenge for me, one of the reasons that I put myself in a sales field in the first place was that I have a tendency to be very shy and introverted. And the easiest way for me to meet that head on and try to grow beyond that and not shrink back into it and just become a person that is totally uncomfortable in a social setting, the easiest way for me to deal with it is to put myself into places where I have to face that interaction on a social level. So I went into a sales field so that I would have to deal with that on a personal one-to-one level. I started my own networking group and learned to moderate all of the meetings. And so that kind of developed out of that same thing of trying to overreach the feeling of being shy and introverted. I didn't want to give in to that. I wanted to be someone that could interact with others on a personal level. And as I got away from some of the out in the field sales work and started doing more and more writing and studying and my own research and things of that nature, I found that it was easier for me to pull myself out of those social settings. And so having written the little essay on the wall, one of the things that I put down in that I really wanted to do on an annual basis was to throw our own Super Bowl party every year and to invite friends that we knew, people from the neighborhood that maybe we were acquainted with, that know that well, but to really make a concerted effort to fill our home with a large number of people, which for me would be extremely uncomfortable, but it was something that I wanted to face. And we ended up with 30-something adults at our first Super Bowl party. It spilled from the living room to the kitchen to we actually opened up one back bedroom of our house that's a fairly good-sized bedroom, put a TV back there. So we had people all over the house, food everywhere, beverages everywhere, and it was just a fabulous Sunday. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I was glad I put myself in that experience and said, okay, this is something I need to do, rather than just say, no, I'll watch the Super Bowl at home alone, or I'll go out and watch it at a sports bar. No, I wanted to have friends, family members, people from the neighborhood over. We're going to do it here, and I'm going to put myself in a situation where my home is open to everybody, and I'm going to grow from that. And it was a fantastic experience.
So how does a person go from being an introvert and having a hard time talking to people one-on-one to being a guy that can basically be a motivational speaker in front of hundreds of people?
You remember when we were younger, there was on the back of comic books, there was always that little 98-pound weakling that was getting sand kicked in his face, and it was an ad for Charles Atlas, and if you got his bodybuilding books, then you could be stronger and you could face the bully and not get sand kicked in your face anymore. Remember
Yep.
seeing those on the back of comic books?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't want to be a 98-pound weakling, and the bottom line is that to overcome that is just to identify what it is and then face it head on and say, I'm not going to be this. It may be a part of my life, but it's not going to rule my life. It's okay to be afraid of things, but it's not okay to subject yourself to that fear to the point where you don't allow yourself to do the things that you need to do and want to do. And in my case, it was things that I needed to do. I needed to make a living, quite obviously, but it was also things that I wanted to do because in the right situations, I actually enjoy being around people. But my inner self will tell me, no, you're shy, you're introverted, you're not comfortable around people, stay home. So on the outside, I have to go to the gym and get my little Charles Atlas going so that bully's not kicking sand in my face on a continual basis. And over a period of time, you get a little bit stronger. And you get a little bit of a measure of success, and you go, hey, I can build on this. I can grow a little bit and take it just one notch further. And that's kind of where it started and where it's continued to the point where now I'm very comfortable speaking to a crowded room because I have a reason to be there, and I feel like I have some things to share that they may be able to build upon. And that's the whole reason I'm there.
Have you found that most of the time when you do own up to a mistake, when you take personal responsibility for things that have gone wrong in your life, that things tend to go better than if you said, no, I had nothing to do with that?
I think in many cases they do, because when we try to, sweep that under the carpet and cover it up, it actually becomes a lot bigger. And when we just own up to it and say, yep, did that, sorry, messed up, let's go forward with this, sometimes it's not nearly as big as we thought it was. And in many cases, it can actually open other doors, as it did with Paul Simon and the Graceland album. It actually opened some fantastic doors for him. So it's kind of interesting how that plays out in life. Our natural tendency is to want everything to go according to plan and for no mistakes to ever be made, but that's just not true to life. Life doesn't work that way.
What do you find was the most difficult thing to put on the paper?
I think some of the most difficult things to put on the paper was a personal thing. I think each book has a little bit of a personal admission in it. I admit to being introverted. I admit to being a little bit shy. I think each book has a little section in it that's a little bit personal. That was hard to put on the page for two reasons. Number one, I don't like putting myself in the spotlight, and I had to kind of get beyond that and say, okay, it's all right to talk about this. And the second reason was that, I was kind of pulling a Band-Aid off a sore, so to speak. But I don't think that any of the books would have the full impact that they really should if I covered up that part. So I think coming clean with some of those things and saying, hey, this is what I deal with, this is what I wrestle with. I've actually had some people who knew me for years that had come back to me and said, I wasn't aware of this. And, so hopefully those things were, pages that were well invested. Hopefully they do have an impact and add a little bit of depth to each one of the books.
Mark DeWayne Combs is my guest. He's written 3 books, Push, Don't Forget Your Cape. Hello, is this on? We met on a podcast forum. Do you have your own podcast then?
I've actually got a couple. I started with the blogs that I write. I started not too long ago just putting those to audio and putting them out. Each one's about 10 or 11 minutes in length, because I realized that, whereas it is there on the webpage for people to read, sometimes it's easier to listen to something than it is to actually pull it up and read it. So I put that out there so people could just subscribe to the podcast and they get something each week that I wrote. It's always something fresh and new within the last 2 months that I had written. That's just me talking about one of the blogs, a little bit of the background as to why I wrote it, and then I just share that. The other thing I do is I try my best to chase down writers and authors of fiction, because I feel like that's a huge challenge. That's the next thing I'm wanting to do, is to write a fictional novel, and I'm working on it, but I'm going to take my time with it because it is a completely different animal than what I normally write. And there's some people that are very, very skilled with it. And so I try to schedule interviews with those authors. I'll be talking Thursday afternoon with Brad Parks, and he's been gracious enough to come on the show for me. And so those are 2 podcasts that I do. And because I have so much spare time, I actually got together with a couple of friends in my fantasy baseball league, and we talk every Friday night for about 30 minutes about fantasy baseball, and I publish that every Saturday morning. So at this given time, I'm writing 2 blogs a week and doing 3 podcasts a week, and still working at a full-time job, and so that kind of gets me from sun up to sundown every day.
Where do we find your podcasts, and where do we find information about your books, Mark?
You can look me up on Facebook. My moniker on Facebook is Mind's Eye Mark, and that's MINDSIEYE Mark. I'm also available on Twitter under that same moniker. And then my website is Mark Combs Author, MARKCOMBS author.com. And hopefully my website is easy enough to find your way around. We've tried to make it easy to navigate.
The BSing with Bob Schmidt podcast is brought to you by Orange Computer. Find them online at orangecomputerlax.com.
This has been another podcastforhire.com production.